to avoid any sound interruptions. This session will be recorded and shared live on Taylor's Bachelor of Social Science FB page. We will be taking a virtual group pictures at the end of the event with our esteemed speakers. So do be camera ready and to turn on your camera for the photography session. In the interest of time, please type your message at the chat box and we will address the relevant question posed if we have enough time to do it, because we already have some question in the pre-registrations earlier. If we have an unwanted people disrupting the session, the technical team would just mute all and we will continue the session after we clear the disruption. Without further ado, it is my honor to introduce our esteemed panelists. In this occasion, we have an outstanding panelist from our prominent presenter, whom I believe shall enrich our insight and understanding on the topic GE15, anti-corruption as an election promises. Before I start, let me introduce the speaker and their background. Just a quick one. Yeah, our first panelist, Mr. Tharma Pillai, is the co-founder and advocacy director of Undi 18, a youth movement that successfully advocated for the lowering of the voting age in Malaysia from 21 to 18 years old. The constitutional amendment received unanimous votes in Parliament, the first time it has ever happened in Malaysian history. The Undi 18 bill has an additional 5.8 million voters, transforming the Malaysian political landscape. In 2020, he was part of the team that launched Parliament Digital, first youth-led virtual parliament session in the world. As acknowledgement of his work, he is recipient of Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2021 and Prestige 40 Under 40 in 2019, together with other international fellowship and network. Tharma was formerly an appointee to the National Youth Consultative Council and the Senate Reform Committee. He is also an author with publication in the books Letters to Home and the Asrama Anthology. And our second panelist, Ms. Cynthia Gabriel, is easily recognized as a champion in the good governance and anti-corruption in Malaysia and also on the global platform. Combining her scientific and legal knowledge and her vast experience of almost 20 years, she has led many platforms to advocate and advise on anti-corruption, the rule of law, and its related themes in her tireless effort. In June 2021, Cynthia was selected to deliver a special address to the plenary of member states at the first ever special sessions against corruption at the United Nations. It was a remarkable recognition of her contributions as a leading global voice of courage for anti-corruption reform. In recognition of her unrelenting work on justice and resolution to corruptions on crimes, including the 1MDB financial heist, Cynthia was appointed in the prestigious Global Future Council of the World Economic Forums, WEF, on economics and anti-corruption issues for the term 2019 to 2021, an advisory body to the World Economic Forums. Welcome, Ms. Cynthia. And our final panelist for tonight, Tan Sri Dr. Syed Hamid Alba, was a member of Parliament from 1990 to 2013. During which time he held various ministerial positions, including Minister in the Prime Minister's Department and Minister of Justice, Minister of Defense, Minister of Home Affairs, and most notably, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Tan Sri is also actively involved with regional and global humanitarian activities. He was the founder and president of Humanity Malaysia, an NGO involved in humanitarian activities, served as a special envoy to Myanmar of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC. Tan Sri is also chairman of World Islamic Economic Forum Foundation. So I'd like to welcome all the panelists, and I think we have a group of great speakers and panelists for tonight. Before we start, I would just like to invite Mr. Anas from Zubedi Malaysia Center Berhad for a welcoming speech. Mr. Anas, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Ainif. I think it's not a welcoming speech, it's a short one. Short one. Yeah, Salam Jatra, everyone. I would like to, on behalf of SLAS, School of Liberal Arts and Sciences Taylors, and Zubaidi, and you don't mind, Ainif, today I add also Raswa Buster, yeah, Raswa Busters. Like to invite, say thank you to all of you, and especially our three panelists, yeah, Tan Sri Ahmed, Cynthia, and Dharma. For all of you, for your information, these three panelists, including me and some of the friends, we are in the APPG all-party parliamentary group on integrity, governance, and anti-corruption. So we are working with some MPs to see how we can help the country lower down at least our corruption and increase the integrity of our government and our people. I hope the three panelists will, also talk a little bit about APPG, maybe one or two of you. Yeah, and please ask them questions at the end. I hope we have time. They are really good speakers. They have vast knowledge, and also they are representing a very wide area. Cynthia from the past, more like NGO, and Undi 18, the young man, Tarma Pillai. We need to hear from the young people too. I'm not saying all of us are old, but Tarma is much younger. And of course, Tan Sri, someone who's been in politics for a long time. He has a lot to share with us. Thank you very much. I pass back to Ainif.
Okay. Thank you, Anas. And thank you so much for joining us tonight to all. We have a good mix of audience in this session. I can see that. And I'm sure we are all eager for us to get started on this webinar entitled GE15 Anti-Corruption as an Election Promise. I know we have only about an hour for this webinar presentation. With so much knowledge, each panelists will have 20 minutes to present. So let us begin. Let us begin with our very first panelist, Mr. Tama Pillai. Mr. Tama, the screen is yours. Let me.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think it's a real pleasure, real honor to be speaking, I think, with such a distinguished audience, such a distinguished panel. For me, I think, of course, I would love to share from the perspective of young people, with the perspective of future, of course, about how do we build a future forward as Malaysians together, especially on the issue of corruption, on the issue of good governance, on the issue of integrity. Because if we want to build a nation together, these are the key elements that we need to ensure for us to have that building blocks for success. There's a very interesting analogy that I've read in the past to talk about what is corruption. Because I mean, just to share with you, in every society you read books by philosophers, they'll tell you that in every society there's always some level of corruption, right? Some level. There'll be some very small level and there'll be some huge, terrible level, right? But the analogy is this. If let's say you're sitting for an exam and you are failing the exam and you are paying the teacher to try to pass, that's one level of corruption, right? That's the intro beginning level. There's a slightly higher level where if you are failing the paper, automatically the teacher comes in and says that, hey, don't worry, it's normal. Just pay me a bit extra, I will let you pass. That's the second level, where it's become normalized. It's become culturalized, right? To an extent, but there's a system to it already. There's a third level, right? Where in order for you to pass, in order for you to even be qualified in the first place, you have to even pay the teacher from the start, right? That's the third level of corruption that's there, where it's debilitating, where it's controlling, where essentially no matter how good of a student or how good of a teacher you are, inevitably you have to be part of that corrupt mechanism. So I think there's three essentially types of societies that there is, right? One is corruption is only existing on a very individual, okay, I'm just going to pass it to you on a small basis level. Second, it becomes more systematized, more structural, more normalized. And the other is, if you don't become corrupt, you can't even be engaged in the big place. You can't even be involved with how we run society. And unfortunately, this is where we are in Malaysia today. when you look at large contracts, you look at large opportunities, when you hear the kind of stories of young entrepreneurs, people who are my age, people who are slightly older, when there's so many of them who want to be involved in nation building, want to solve problems for the country that the rakyat is facing, not only are they not allowed to do so, they're saying if you want to be able to play, you have to pay. You have to pay to play, right? In order to do good and in order to solve problems, right? So there are many people essentially who do not want to be part of the system. So as you can see, we are in Malaysia what I would categorize as the most chronic stage of corruption in terms of not only is there a structural element, but it's also a severe cultural element. Now, I'm sure my other speakers can speak about different generations and the ideas and perspective on corruption. But I think there's also a very interesting piece of data that I was shared with SPRM, right, Badan Penjaga Rasuah Malaysia. So they had done surveys within universities that gone around and they checked what is young people's or mahasiswas acceptance towards certain corrupt practices, right? So they gave certain scenarios. Would you give a bribe in this scenario? Will you take a bribe in this scenario, right? To their surprise, about 30 to 35% of the young people of the mahasiswa that were being polled within their survey said that they were okay with certain types of corrupt practices. 30 to 35%, right? And I want to point out why this number is so shocking. Already 1/3 is a terrible number, but this was a fake scenario. This was when there's no pressure. This is when essentially they are able to make certain decisions without any thinking of, oh my goodness, I need to pay my bills. I need to buy a handbag for my wife. I need to buy a car. I need to pay for my children's school fees, right? Or my friend has just gotten a really nice car. I want to buy a car. So there is a lack of pressure, right? And also a lack of desire because they're still mahasiswa. And there's still up to 30% who said that they were okay with certain types of corrupt practices, right? And I think that's something that was extremely worrying for me to see the culturalization of these kind of corrupt practices, right? And corruption is also not a crime of those who are uneducated, who are poor. Corruption is most of the time is a white collar crime. It is most of the time it is a crime done by those who are educated, those who have degrees, those who are privileged, those who can speak well, right? These are the people who typically engage in the largest scale of corruption. So we cannot say that these people are uneducated, these people are stupid, these people are not smart when they decide in corruption. I think the reason why I'm explaining this to you, right, is a very simple reason, right? Because we need to be able to understand and diagnose the problem properly before we're able to even talk about how we can solve these problems, right? We must be able to first identify that, okay, yes, Malaysia is in a chronic stage of corruption. That's number one. Number two is that we need to be able to identify that there is some sort of still a cultural acceptance, right, of these practices. And of course, number three is that we must also recognize that there is a long way to go, even with a lot of young people right now, especially even with certain mahasiswa that we have. Of course, I just want to share that the data that was received from SPR, even for me, I take it with a pinch of salt. I don't know what's their methodology, but when they shared me, there was 30 to 35% that were okay with corruption. It is still a very shocking piece of information, right? So what can we do, right? What are the kind of work that we need to do to go forward, to be able to fight the corruption, to be able to make things better, and try to improve things, right? I think there's two elements that is very important that we need to be able to push forward, right? One is, of course, education, right? I think that part, of course, throughout our conversations, we'll be talking a lot about this, right? What is anti-corruption as an education, right? What is the philosophy, right? Is it just a matter of ethics and principles, right? Is that more than that, right? But also, I also want to share that systems matter deeply, right? I think too many Malaysians, I think in the civil society world, when it comes to NGO work, we are so used to talking about systemic change, institutional reform, big ideas. It becomes so used to saying that thing. But but often when I do engagements with many people, with many average Malaysians, I realize that message is not reaching, right? Because there is a very distinct idea or a very separate idea on what is the solutions for corruptions, right? Where the idea is always we need to get more high integrity candidates. We need to get good people there, right? We need to get the best people who are being chosen, which is not wrong. I think we do need to get good people elected to change systems, that's for sure, right? But I just want to mention that without a systemic change, even good people can become bad, right? And often in our current system, remember the first analogy I gave, even good people are forced to become bad if they want to even survive the system that we exist in, right? If, for example, if let's say they are not willing to take certain money from tycoons, or they're not able to take certain crony contracts, they're not able to survive within our current political realm, right? So these are the real issues that they face. So the target should be, I think two elements, right? One is, of course, we bring in more candidates or more individuals with integrity, but also we must develop a system where even the worst, the most corrupt, the most evil, the most greedy of individuals are forced to become good, are forced to act in a just manner in the end. That must always be the perception or the end result or the end goal that we want to try to achieve when it comes to this idea of anti-corruption, right? And last thing I just want to very, very quickly touch on in terms of the work that we've been doing with Rasuah Busters, with the ABGM for corruption. For us, I think it's very important. Of course, for the past year, we've been very, very fortunate to be part of a coalition led by Sina, led by Dato' Husam, and together with many other CSOs to be able to look at, to be really able to bring the agenda of anti-corruption to the mainstream, right? To something that is I guess, to have this national platform, to talk about Rasuah Busters, to talk about how there must be pledges against corruption, right? I think this is something that's so important to bring into this political sphere. I do want to encourage more people who are listening into the work of Rasuah Busters to come and support us, to come and join the kind of work that we do, because we can't work on this alone, right? When it comes to pledges of anti-corruption, when it comes to pushing our future candidates or parliamentarians or even aduns to do a good job and to be against corruption, it is very important that it's not just us shouting into the void, but it is a collective movement together towards that singular goal. That's number one. Number two is that we've also been very fortunate to be able to have the opportunity to work together with Parliament, to be able to work through various bodies to recommend specific reforms. And I think we'll be talking about those reforms even more, right? What can be done from a systemic perspective. And I don't want to go into too much detail now, because I'm sure we'll be going into details later. But the idea is this, right? There are many elements within our current system that make it very difficult to challenge corruption, right? Whenever corruption is being challenged, it is often illegal, right? You can go to jail for telling that person is corrupt, right? So we don't have a proper Whistleblowers Protection Act. We don't have a proper framework for anti-corruption. We don't have a proper framework for what is political financing, what is corruption in the first place, right? We don't even have a way to define what is political corruption, right? There is no definition for it, right? So which is why you see in the news so many cases of very clearly conflict of interest, very unethical practices. They keep escaping court, multiple times, right? Because of that lack of definition. And these are the challenges that we must fight together in order to systematize that fight against corruption. So I think that should be all from me as just an intro, as just the beginning. But I think the main takeaway that I wanna bring in this conversation is that it must go hand in hand, that culturalization and that education, but together with building and evolving the systems to ensure anti-corruption is a reality. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Tamar Pillai. I just want to proceed with our second panelist, Ms. Cynthia Gabriel. Miss Cynthia, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Anif. I hope all of you can hear me and see me. I am very thankful to Zubedi and Taylor's College for this information, because for this invitation, and the kind of information that we're talking about today on GE15 and anti-corruption. And with all the speculation that's going on in the news, you never know if Parliament might be dissolved tomorrow because the Prime Minister has an audience with the King. So the country is now grasping on clutches, not really knowing what is really going to happen. You know, everybody is really wondering what the future of Malaysia is going to be. Is it even more messy than what it is now? Or is it going to be a more settled, more stable situation post-general elections? Now, the way the politicians are grappling at straws and fighting for power and grabbing positions and all that, it really looks like no one is fully confident of what the outcome would be. So with this statement that none of the political parties are confident of winning a large majority, is where I want to place this conversation of anti-corruption and GE15 today. Because for one, people like Tharma, MP Syed Saddiq and all have worked very hard to lower the voting age. And this has very direct impact on all of us students, I say us, but actually all of you students, and those who are tuning in, who are young people, that this might be your very first time you might go to the ballot box. And you might not even realize that you have the right because now you're automatically registered as a voter. And these changes were actually something that was worked very, very hard by many civil society groups, MPs. And for the first time, you saw politicians from both sides of the house actually voting to ensure that younger people get a chance to determine what kind of government we can bring in for the next elections, for the next 5 years. So this is where I believe the college students, university students, and young people are really the key and the answer to GE15. And it's really very, very good that Taylor's College and Zubadi is doing this today because the challenges are aplenty. And out of those voters between 18 to 21 that now can vote, may not even know what is the whole big deal about voting. Why would we even want to go to the ballot box? I know in Australia, for example, where my brother lives, they institute a system where if you don't go out to vote, it is not just your hak untuk mengundi, it's not just your right, but it is actually an obligation. So if you don't go, then you will be fined a certain portion of money to be paid to the government because you did not fulfill your obligations to vote. So this is the power of how we can actually transform a very corrupt system to be something that we want to see with more light in the future, with more clean government, with better integrity. And in order to do that, this is the time to act because there will be candidates contesting in all of your constituencies. And one of the first things we should be doing is to actually talk about what can we actually demand from our candidate. Because we don't know who's going to win. There will be Pakatan Harapan, Barisan Nasional, Perikatan Nasional, all putting in their candidates. But the first things we might want to ask is, are you really a clean man or woman wanting to represent my rights in Parliament? Can you declare your assets? Can you actually show me that you believe that some anti-corruption reforms will be supported by you after you win the election? So if young people actually lead the way to demand these kind of things from candidates, which means before they win, they actually have to consciously give a commitment to the people. Of course, it's not legally binding, but at least it's something that you can hold them to account. That this candidate said, okay, I will support this. I will declare my assets. I believe in transparency in how I'm going to spend my constituency funds, etc., etc. So if we put just 1, 2, or 3 demands for them to meet, and if they're not even bothered to actually look at your demands, then you know these kind of candidates are just not worth your while. And these kind of candidates are probably just out there to hold power. And for people like us who have been working in this field for some time, I can tell you that one of the most difficult things is that when we elect somebody to power, it is the power that actually helps to facilitate corruption and entrenches it, because it's very, very difficult to hold power to account. And when I say hold power to account, I mean making people with power, and usually it's politicians, and sometimes it could be corporate leaders as well, who are very, very wealthy, that they can actually come in to control the political system. And this is where we then come in to understand how money actually becomes so overwhelming in our government, in our election system, that I found out very disappointingly, it wasn't my vote that made a difference, but it was all that money is swimming around. And the culture that Tharma talked about, election time, most people will say is the best time to ask for whatever you want, because they'll be tarring the road in front of your house more than 10 times during the election period, only because they want to, you know, butter you up a bit, put some icing on the constituents to actually think, oh yeah, this guy is actually great. But let's just think about where this money is coming from. It's actually public funds, and the money doesn't belong to these politicians when they are campaigning, etc. They're supposed to actually use that money to services throughout the 5 years, not just during campaign period, etc., so that the more money a political party has, the more likely they will be able to win. So that's why there's some big type of agenda that we hold. Like, for example, we are all pushing now to get a political financing act in place before the general elections. And we're really like racing against time, because elections might be called tomorrow. But then there's a draft of the bill that's already ready. But the bill needs to go through first reading, second reading, needs to be approved by Dewan Negara, it needs to be gazetted. There's no way we can actually have it unless elections is held sometime next year, maybe in May or something. But if we don't have that kind of law that controls money in the elections, we're going to see again, the parties that have more money will win the election. The parties that will be supported by property tycoons, by media moguls, and all those that are billionaires may want to control the political system so that they can actually be the ones to get the contracts, the permits, the licenses, to actually look at how they can make their development projects and actually get various kinds of favors from the government. And so this whole thing about what Tharma was talking about how entrenched the system is, I think is very heavy stuff. But as young people, I think the first thing to know is your hak, your rights. You have rights. Your first right is your voting rights. And in order to exercise that properly, you actually need to have at least some sufficient bits of information to help you make the right decision. We've had 3 governments in 3 years. We have had some power grabbing going on since March 2020. We had a change of government, a big change in 2018, where the opposition won. And then there was all this wheeling and dealing among politicians. So we had 2 different changes of government after that. And we see that in this whole time of unelected governments ruling the country, the reform agenda, when I say reform agenda, I'm actually talking about improving the laws, like how to control money, campaign financing during the elections, access to information, which is really big and very important, because if we don't have information, we won't be able to vote wisely. And that's why you see that with the social media and all that, there's lots of misinformation, disinformation campaigns to confuse us, so that we also won't know who to believe. And this is where that whole anti-corruption narrative needs to be built, not just by the 3 panelists and the people who are involved in Rasuah Busters and some good MPs, etc., but it has to be a mass call. And I just want to remind all of you, in case you weren't already conscious, you might have seen how happy your parents were, for example, or your older siblings, when they put their vote out and they saw that their vote actually could make a difference. There was change. It's not that the change was going to bring in a better government, but the change itself could institute more people participation, more people power, and more possible changes in policies and laws in government. So change is very much part of a democratic system, which will help with actually changing structures and so on. So when we had one coalition ruling the government for 60 years, that became a problem, not because of the 60 years, but because the accountability level was going down, down, down. They felt they didn't have to answer to anybody. And then big things like the 1 MDB started to happen, when actually small 1 MDBs were already happening. But it was just something that the Rakyat could not stand up and say enough, you know. So in 2018, a lot of the campaign was ran on an anti-corruption ticket, which means Malaysians can stand up and say, no, I do not want corruption, I want clean leaders. But along the way, we get disempowered, we get our focus on different things. And I just wanted to end with two more points. One is this GE is a little bit different because the last 2.5 years, most of us have really struggled with bread and butter issues around trying to survive the COVID pandemic. Some of us may even have lost some relatives, friends, and loved ones. And it's been quite a traumatic period because sometimes you just, you know, everything has suddenly a full stop. You cannot do so many things. You cannot leave the house. You cannot go to work. You cannot go out with your friends. You cannot do many things. But for many people who are bringing money to their homes, like your parents, for example, or your big brother or sister, or even yourselves if you're working and just got into the corporate world and so on. And suddenly everything stops and income levels have been so affected. And our economy is really diving down. I think this GE15, the big call will be, how is that going to make a difference to me? And here is where I'm hoping we could actually discuss in the dialogue time, how Taylor's College might want to pursue initiatives to actually call for clean government that will promote better economy, clean investments, that, you know, that you would actually want to maybe even start a good governance club in your college or an anti-corruption club to actually make these calls, because employment, labor rights, all these are really very, very important critical issues for GE15. And that's why I believe that this whole fight, the battle against corruption, is very much linked to all of our other rights. And it's best to stand up. And I just wanted to say also that my background is one that's coming from an entirely non-political family. Nobody talks about politics. Everybody reads and gossips in the dinner table and all that, but nobody does anything about it. But when I started to get into activism, civil society, you know, they were quite, you know, worried and flabbergasted. Kept asking me, when am I going to get a real job? When is it that, you know, I'm actually going to think of climbing up the corporate ladder? I have an engineering degree as a first degree. And so they were just like completely, really, really disturbed by the fact that the universities can actually be a very, very good place for you to start thinking that your life is more just than your comfortable life of you and your family and all the nice things you do, you know, going out at night, going to all these fun places and doing all those nice things when we're all young. But there's actually a society, and the society is actually very imbalanced. There's a lot of people that don't have the privileges that I had. And I never thought that my life was actually privileged until I got to realize that there's a much bigger society out there. And because of the imbalance, there was something about how our society was operating that was not very equal, not very fair. And at the heart of it is actually about governance. And at the heart of it is about discriminatory policies. And at the heart of it is really about mismanagement, malpractice, and poor management of money, up to the point that you could actually find politicians in power who become so corrupt and self-centered that accountability, transparency, integrity becomes meaningless to them. So my only call here for today, and in all of the conversation that we're going to have, is how can the young generation actually salvage this country from despair? And we've seen the worst of times after Sheraton move. And where is it that our rights are placed? It's actually not at all on the agenda of many of these power-grabbing politicians. So we have to make the call and to say that we're the bosses. We're giving you our vote. If you want my vote, then you have to promise to be clean. You have to promise that you have integrity. You have to promise that you'll be accountable for your actions. And most of all, that you'll be transparent for all the money and what kind of policies you will actually support. How are you going to protect my rights in Parliament? So I think that there's a lot colleges can actually do to try to build the momentum around this. And it's never too late. I mean, even if elections is tomorrow, the campaign period is 1 month. So we can do a lot of stuff. And I think maybe it's a good time to discuss what is doable as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Miss Cynthia. Just to maybe just tell to everyone about what's going on. Even this platform itself, Malaysian politics and public issues, is one of the module that's created by Taylor's University for the students. We just want students to be actively participate of whatever going on. Actually, I myself is the lecturer for this. That's why we created this webinar, because we want the youngs to understand and feel the importance of knowing politics in Malaysia. Because from the feedback that we got, sometimes, they'll be like, yeah, we don't want politics, it's too much, it's too much, So this is one of the platform that we created for students in Taylor's. Yeah, so just to let everyone know. Anyway, thank you, Miss Cynthia, for your presentation. And last but not least, I would like to invite the last panelist, Tan Sri, Dr. Syed Hamid Abba. Tan Sri, the screen is yours. Let me pin to you here. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Aini.
You're welcome.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I think the screen is indeed mine after hearing to Tama and Cynthia. This is very, very interesting. I would just like to make a preliminary point. I think what is important at present is that for the first time, the issue of integrity, governance, and anti-corruption have become people's and society's issue. Previously, we tend to know and keep quiet about it. But now it has gone into the public domain. So it's very interesting for us to discuss about politics, G15 and all these things. And I think, to be fair to the people, I think people, now we are asking the voters to make the right choice. But my view is in 2018, I think 2018, the people really want to see change. In 2018, people really want to see change. But they were disappointed that their expectation, because whatever it is, our change was very good. The democratic process was very good. So I think, but it doesn't happen the way that we expect it to happen. And we have, as you mentioned, from 2018, we have 3 prime ministers. And today we have a system that is not what is within our system. So it's a collection of people, collection of MPs. Then we form a government, and we are still looking for direction. Anyway, thank you to Taylor's College, Zavidi and Aini for inviting me, including me in this one. I do not want to make a speech, but I like to make certain points. I think I think it's very important for us to bear in mind. I think we have, even though now our AAG and the civil society, we are trying to create that awareness, trying to say that there is a need for change, institutional change, that we are saying that corruption is a cancer. We are saying that it is something that will kill us. All these are talking about truism. But I think there's enough laws if you are serious about wanting to change. There's enough laws at present without trying to rush everything through. We tried anyway. I think Cynthia knows about it. We tried to say that before the election, we should get certain things, changed. Like we want to get Whistleblowers Act amended. We want to get certain things about the Anti-Corruption Act to be amended, certain sections of the Anti-Corruption Act amended. But this is not going to happen very, I think, immediately, because there are problems. So I think what we need to look at today is that I find that the ultimate solution to corruption is in our mindset. Why I say that? Because I think there is a very high level of tolerance among Malaysians about wrongdoing, about being tainted, about conflict of interest. So when you take these issues, being tainted, conflict of interest, as all right, so long as it is, you define that it's not corrupt, then we are going to have problems. And I think the change that we need to see is to challenge our cultural norms, to challenge our tolerance norm. We must have zero tolerance of any. Like, say, for example, I have been calling for a long time because we were worried about political financing. We were worried about spending of money. Everywhere, money in general elections, whether it is in Malaysia, in the US or UK, money is being spent for politics. But the most important thing is, if you talk about governance, you must have transparency. You must have integrity. I have been asking for that we must have an audit. At the end of the election, we must submit our account and show the audit. Who gives us money? What is the money is used for? So I think these are some of the weaknesses within us, and that need to be changed. So it affects, we must consider that corruption affects people, affects society, and affects our economy. I was in the cabinet for almost 20 years. I think we have been talking about ketirisan, leakages for a long time. And I remember when Abu Qasim was the head of the MACC, I was the Minister of Home Affairs. He came to see me because he wanted to put integrity officer in some of his offices, because Ministry of Home Affairs is considered as one of the places where there is a lot of corruption, whether within the police, immigration, and all these things. So he mentioned to me whether, I said, yes, you can put your officer. But the most important thing is, can you just change by having an integrity officer? In order to change, sometime you need to uproot. That's why you need to see the root causes. I don't think if it is a cancer, if you consider it cancer, it will kill us. To change institutions will not be enough. You have to uproot everything. You have to revamp everything. Not only the politicians who are, but the officers, the businesses, everyone is in this in order for us to change society, to be able for us to ensure that our election will be a clean election. Okay, the young now, there is an addition, I think Tama and group like Syed Sadiq and all this sort of thing. You know, what does it mean? Tainted, it means the pot cannot call the kettle black. Everyone who wants to consider themselves free from corruption must make sure that they live a clean and a non-tainted life. So I consider that we need to do certain things that is important. We must have a high demand. I think Cynthia talked about the high demand. You know, I think whether you call it war, battle, or fight, society must have zero tolerance for corruption. Any leaders, this forthcoming election, any leaders who are tainted, for any issues, whether it is a moral or ethical issues, should not be a candidate for election. It's not a question of, we always look at the law, or we bring the person to the law and we need to finish the process of the law. We are convicted, we are still there, we are, you know, this is not the tainted. It means a moral issue. You have no right to represent when you have cases. You should not be waiting for the whole person to be found guilty. I don't think when the law finds guilty, if you have got any records of any candidates or any person who wants to be in politics who are not clean, who have a record of that is tainted with corruption or conflict of interest, then we should reject that person. So I think it will not be fair for us to just relate this to GE15, because it has got a long history of we have been since independent. We have got a patronage system. We have a system of, you know, everything is okay. We have got rules, regulations. These rules and regulations make things difficult, so people want to have a shortcut towards getting what they want. So I think maybe we need to look at it more seriously in order for us to overcome corruption. And then I think, say, for example, the Merdeka Center say 51% of people consider that corruption should become a priority. If you remember, under the NKRA, under Najib's government, the top priority one of the NKRA was fighting against corruption. So I think all these things are issues that and I'm one person who do not believe that the law is the answer. I believe that the law can be a process to help us. But in the first place, we must create a society that is morally, ethically, can show their keen interest in having people who represent them, that has got integrity, that practice governance, and that is against corruption, real corruption, whether in the form of conflict or non-conflict. So I don't like to speak very long, because I think there are a lot of challenges facing us, and we have to address these challenges. And whether the election is tomorrow or the next year, it does not matter to me. I think by now you must have a table who you want, especially amongst the young, who you want to be your representative in parliament. Power corrupts absolutely. All of us understand that. We say that power opposition tend to corrupt. But I think more I would blame on the people who knows that this can corruption, and yet they keep on returning the same people, the same party to lead them. So at the end of it, we still complain. It's a very challenging issue. It's multidimensional, and I think election promises, there's nothing wrong with election promises and making roads, Cynthia. Making roads is good during the election. I love during the elections that people get what have been promised to them. Election is the time that they can demand, that deliver what is your election manifesto and the promise that you have given to the public. So there is at least, it creates awareness of the need to fulfill or to perform whatever promises or election manifesto that you have put forward. So I think the only thing is we must get rid, I think as a final saying, we must get rid of conflict. We must get rid of the tolerance towards integrity, non-integrity. We are tolerance. We must get rid of being acceptable to seeing governance not good, rule of law is not followed. We are very tolerant to corruption until the person is brought to court, until we are damaged, until we are. So all these are the things that we must do something together, and let us move together with the I think the Rasuah busters and the committee. I think at least you have commitment from the member of parliament and the civil society organization to work together and to make it a people's agenda, to make it and not only for a certain group, not seeking popularity, but seeking a clean and good government in order to lead us to a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tan Sri. So we have listened to all the three panelists, and I guess everyone have different views on this. And I would just want to go straight to the questions. And I hope the panelists can address this. Hang on, let me just pin all the panelists here. Yep, hang on. And Mr. Tama. Yep, okay. And let me just share the question with everyone here. Okay. This is the question that we get from the, can everyone see the question? Yeah. From the registration. I will just take verbatim from word to word what the questions are. The first question, has any organization assessed the amount lost in corruptions and mismanagement the last 10 years could have raised the standard of living of the B40 and the income of government employees in M40 could have been raised percentage-wise? Maybe not a question, but more of a comment, or is there anyone who can help to just, answer this? Or maybe to enlighten, do you have any knowledge on what have been done on this?
I think the question is a fair question, Aini.
Yeah.
But I don't have the figures.
Yeah.
But I think I have the feeling that if there is less leakages, the cost of governing is reduced, the costs of projects are reduced, all these excesses because of corrupt practices can be utilized as a resource for development, especially bringing up the standard of living of the M40 in order for you to do to have better input on improving education and helping the poor. So, but I don't have the figure, so I will not be able to relate it in terms of data analysis, because which is what they need. I think maybe Cynthia or Tama may have those figures.
Miss Cynthia or Mr. Tama? Okay, you're muted.
I was just trying to say that it's a very good question, but it's a question which is saddled with two things. One is usually corruption is a hidden crime, and it only comes to the fore, and it has been such in the last few years because of the unstable situation, and also because of the change of government. There was an opportunity for prosecution to bring some of these cases to court, etc. And then it can get documented. But normally corruption itself is a hidden crime. And by the time you discover it, it would have been something that took place 2 years ago or after a project is completed, etc., especially when it comes to procurement type of corruption. But there have been some academic studies and I know some civil society groups that have been trying to look at the cost of corruption. And this is what the question really is about. But the other point about raising the standard of living and how much, if you just look at 1MDB stolen money alone, we're talking about, we still owe debts up to 32 billion US dollars debts that we have to pay. But the kind of money that was lost with 1MDB itself, we're really talking about the Auditor General actually accounted for about 7 billion US dollars. So that's about 30 billion ringgit lost on one mega corruption scandal. And can you imagine what 30 billion would have been able to do for the B40, to get in more vaccines at the time, to help the economy, etc. But the main issue here is about tracking and investigating corruption crimes. And a lot of the time it's part of the shadow economy or part of the hidden world that is very difficult when you also don't have an access to information law, which is why we are advocating for that. It's very hard for the rakyat to follow because even contracts at local government level, even contracts and minutes of some of these contracts are all OSA, all official secrets. And it cannot be declassified unless the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister orders for it to be so. So the information is held so tightly that it really is a very big challenge to actually track corruption. And I think that question is a very important one to see how we can actually break the system to discover it before it's too late.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you, Ms. Cynthia. And let me just proceed with the second question. Sorry, here. Can execution punishment on corruption be included in the constitutional law, similar to that of minimum possession of heroin, weight 15 grams and above, will be hanged if convicted, unless death execution punishment is implemented? The deep-rooted corruption, like metastasized cancer, will linger on and destroy the nation totally. So, what is your opinion on this? Maybe Miss Cynthia, I think you can.
I think Tharma has a lot to say.
Tharma also? Okay. Yep.
I can weigh in, right? Sure. More than happy to do so. I think the thing about death penalty, right, is that it is a very, like people get very excited over the idea, right? Or that you're punishing the worst of the worst people. And they're so excited because it's like, oh, wow, we're doing the worst we can do to this terrible person I don't like. But I mean, for me, I mean, we put aside the excitement, right? My interest really is, can we get as many corruptors as possible? Can we make sure that as many of these corrupt individuals go into jail, right? Or at the very least, they pay for the corruption, they have to return back the money, right? So there are many laws that are there, essentially, right? My concern is this: when you talk about the death penalty, the burden of proof to have a death penalty case is so incredibly high. Now, I want to give you this example. Right? How long did we take to put Najib in jail? We took an incredibly long time, right? All the way to federal court. It took, years just on a single case. Imagine if the burden of proof was even higher, because it's not just a criminal case, but it's also a case of death penalty, right? And I want to point out, in any country where the death penalty is involved, there's so many rounds of review, so many rounds of appeals that are additional, even compared to a normal case of criminal law, right? So I think that, I mean, to be quite honest, I understand the sentiment that is very exciting to feel like, hey, we have to really scare them. But I want to be very clear that even jail is actually scary, to be honest. You ask the corruptors, you look at how Najib is so afraid to go to jail, right? But the fact that there is jail term, that didn't stop him from being corrupt. The reason is because he felt that he was untouchable. So for me, I think my priority is this. Number one is, can we make our systems more efficient to capture corruption faster? One interesting suggestion that we got from SPRM was that, and this is a complete opposite of what is being suggested here. From SPRM, they wanted a way for low-level corruptors to be able to say that they bersabit, that means you can accept that you're guilty. You can accept a very minimal jail term, or you can avoid jail, but you essentially have to pay back only in certain threshold or minimum cases, right? Because they want to be able to move forward with those corruption cases even faster. And this is a system that's being used in the UK because they want to get as many corruptors as possible. So I think that, in my personal opinion, I'm not really a fan of the death penalty as a way to scare people, because evidence shows that it's not scary enough. People often believe that they are above the law, and in many cases in Malaysia, people are above the law. But in fact, it adds more layers of bureaucracy, more layers of legal proceeding that makes it even harder for SPRM and us to stop corruptors. So if we can capture, let's say, 50 corruptors, now we're only capturing 2 or 3 because the level is so high. So I think that's the way in for me, right? I much rather prefer we get as many as we can, then we get 1 or 2 and we get excited because you're giving them death penalty, and that's all. So I think you have to choose. You want the sexy, attractive option, or do you really want the option that works based on many countries around the world? There are models that are being used. So I think those are the questions that we had. However, I do think that there can be certain extra proceedings. For example, I do believe that there could be special courts, or there could be special mechanisms to speed up corruption cases. I do think that that's something that we can consider, right, to add in extra resources for corruption cases in particular. But I personally am not in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tama. Interesting.
If I can add to that, there's a couple of points, and I find the questions are also sophisticated, because people are actually thinking very hard about how to punish the offenders and the corruptors. So the first point that I wanted to raise was it is necessary to raise the bar on the penalty for corruption. But I will not support a death penalty approach, only because for corruption to occur, and in the way it's so sophisticated these days, it isn't about me taking money from Anif and giving it to Anas Zubadi. It's not so simple. You might kill one person who is like at the center of the corruption crime. But if you kill that person, it does not mean that the rest of the syndicate is also killed. So you need to have a much more sophisticated approach to get ahead of the criminals. And death penalty is not something that will kill a corruption crime, because normally it takes more than 2 to tango, or it takes 2 to tango, not one person. So, it takes a group of people to actually execute a very sophisticated corruption crime. So we are no longer talking about simple bribes to policemen, because that are petty crimes and petty corruption, but we're talking about sophisticated corruption now. Even the littoral combat ship, if you look at the details of how the decisions were made and how the companies were suddenly switched, and the designs of the ship were switched, the arahan dari atas, the different shell companies that were actually operating. 1MDB is, of course, a very serious case study of grand corruption. But this is my point. You kill one person, you're not actually killing the syndicate that is causing the organized crime to take place. And corruption is usually an organized crime. So the answer is also not to kill everybody in there, but the answer is to crush the network. And how can you do it best? So you do have to actually enhance deterrence, and you also have to enhance jail terms, and you have to make it very clear that corruption is a crime. So that whole Malu Apa Bosku period was very disruptive to the whole thing about corruption being a serious crime, because when you have someone of such high power being convicted of corruption, but that person is able to traverse the country, campaign for elections, and do all kinds of things, it makes people feel that, oh, actually corruption, okay lah, small crime lah, it's not a big deal, it's not like murder. But that's a wrong message, you see. The message is you must punish, but you don't kill. You punish the person so that the person and the criminal network and the syndicates know that this is what can happen. You can spend a lifetime imprisonment. You could be, having a really difficult time without having a corporal or capital punishment meted against you. So that message that corruption is a heinous crime must go out. Deterrence should be stepped up, prison sentences stepped up, etc., but not capital and corporal punishment. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is that in some countries, there are non-enforcement methods that are being used. And this is one of the other exciting things about the anti-corruption fight, that there is a light shining at the end of the tunnel. Let's say what happened with the example of 1MDB again. There's something called asset recovery, which means some of the money lost, which means the stolen money which was used to buy luxury property in London, New York, Paris, and all these great cities of the world, used to money bought with, say, 1MDB stolen money, can actually be part of a system to recover the stolen assets. And the way to do it is like what the FBI and the Department of Justice had executed at that time, because a lot of the property bought via Jolo and his associates were in the US. And in order for the US to clean up their financial systems, they actually instituted a civil forfeiture suit. So civil forfeiture is not something which is enforcement type. It doesn't send you to jail kind of thing, but you actually have to give up the property. You're forced to like let it off, so it gets auctioned, and that money is actually returned back to the country of origin, and the money is actually returned back, in this case, to the Malaysian government. And then there's a trust fund that's set up and all that for the money to be facilitated back. So there are a couple of billions that have been returned. And also other big people, other big, like the audit firms, KPMG, Ernst & Young, etc., who also they partook in all these fraudulent statements, etc. So they had to pay fines. And then now they have to actually pay back. It's a soft punishment, but the reality is the people get back a portion of the funds. Of course, money used for gambling, lifestyle, or that hilang pink diamond and all that kind of stuff, you cannot really get it back. But this is another approach for anti-corruption returns, that the people, which is the people, you and I, who suffered losses because of corrupt practices, may be able to see some amount of that money returned back. But then there's a whole other challenge of whether the government of the day will actually use the money for the right things. Right now, the money is being used to pay the 1MDB debts. So we are not actually seeing any benefit being brought to us. So these are some of the approaches that are being used globally. And I also wanted to say that there's all this momentum around an international anti-corruption court, because you will find it isn't just our domestic laws that are the problem. You find people like Jolo and many other people being shielded by certain countries. So which means there's not enough cooperation to fight corruption across borders, etc. So you can do all these nasty things and leave the country and go and hide somewhere, and then you'll never be caught. You know, that's part of the weakness of the whole anti-corruption framework that was mentioned just now, both domestically and internationally.
All right. Thank you, Cynthia. Yeah, Tan Sri, you want to add? Yes.
I think enough have been said about it, but I think the question of, like just now, Tama mentioned about making it quicker. I think the most important thing is to achieve justice and to make sure that justice is done. It's not only the law, is to ensure that there is justice. Under the Corruption Act, under the SPRM, there is a lot of presumption that makes enable you to conclude that certain things can be done quicker. But the most important thing is, I think in this particular case, I look the example that we have in the deterrent of the death penalty for the drug cases. It doesn't solve the drug. Drug cases. There's a lot of drug cases still. There's a lot of victims of, so I think it's actually now is the time for us. We have enough. The laws are there. We want to shorten the thing. We want to have a deterrent sentence. But I don't believe in death penalty for, or to have the person shot. And in order for us to, because the whole chain, you need to, just like a supply chain just now, like Cynthia mentioned, there is a whole change of it. It's a whole syndicate of it that you must ensure that you will be able to get rid of. So in this particular case, I think what needs to be done is to look at models, success story, why certain countries are able to reduce corruption. I say you take, for example, in the case of Indonesia. Indonesia had very high level of corruption, and now they were able to tackle the corruption. Not that it is without corruption, but they were able to manage that corruption, and they were able to bring to court and to justice, and people get more confidence on the system. So I think we need to look at the success story of other countries and the international. Just now we mentioned about international cooperation. International cooperation is necessary. Like this, in the case of bringing back Dolo and all this sort of thing, there must be cooperation with the countries here. We need to work together with other countries. There must be agreement, and I think there are agreement, but it's somehow or rather people can escape being called and to be able to be part of a solution to fighting against corruption. And I think the corrupt practices are getting more and more sophisticated. So we need to also upgrade our skills and ability in the prosecution of cases of corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. We have 20 questions actually coming forward and some in the chat box. I will try to address all the questions from the chat box too, but let me try to finish the question from the registered participants. Okay, the next question here. Can we have an ombudsman for corruption, compliance and ethics here in Malaysia? Can we? I'm not so sure who can help with this. Or do anyone come across, is there any possibility of having this here in Malaysia?
I think the idea of an ombudsman is very good, but we have to look at the success rate of the countries that have actually introduced ombudsman. And like I think recently Namibia introduced have an ombudsman. This recommendation for ombudsman for corruption was written and recommended by the late Professor Dr. Hussein. Right? And he said that ombudsman is necessary. But in the case of the government, when this idea of ombudsman came up, what they decided was to form the public complaints agency, the public bureau. But I think this is not good enough. We need to have an ombudsman for the purposes of really monitoring, supervising. And the other thing is what the APG is doing, that is report to Parliament, rather than reporting it to the government of the day, or it is being brought to the government, to the leaders of the government, or in the executive. I think the role of Parliament must be given more importance if we want to introduce ombudsman, or even if our public complaints bureau, this public complaints department, if they have to report and things that are not good are being, I think, subverted in that particular case, are not, I think it's not taken up. So I think this is a very good suggestion, and we should look at it seriously, but and see how it can be introduced in our country. And the type, when we want to have an ombudsman, we must make sure that the choice of the ombudsman is independent, is free from political influence. If it is not free from political influence, then again, we will have the problem of a lack of independence. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri.
If I can just add a little bit to what Tan Sri said, there is a bill actually floating around, an ombudsman bill to replace the Public Complaints Bureau. But Tan Sri's point is critical, because if it's not independent, there's really no point setting up another jabatan that will have massive executive influence over it. The idea of an ombudsman means the ombudsman has to have its own statutory law. It has to have its own provisions that will ensure its independence, because the ombudsman idea is to actually stop malpractice and possible potential corruption in its tracks. You see, like the Auditor General only gets in to audit projects and different things only after the project is over. By that time, all that money already lost, and the wastage and the leakage has already happened. So ombudsman is supposed to be real-time complaints mechanism, and the ombudsman bill is an ombudsman for public service. So it's actually supposed to look at public procurement issues, etc. So because of our political turbulence being experienced today, and so many governments in the last couple of years, the ombudsman bill also got put on the back burner. And we don't know, it was supposed, if you track the news articles, it was supposed to have been presented last 2 parliament sittings or something, but it never happened, and we don't know where it is. So we should be actually finding out what really would be mechanisms to punish, quote unquote, say public individuals and civil servants who actually commit all this misconduct, because every time the Auditor General presents his report in Parliament, he's talking about billions being wasted per year on wastage, leakage, Christmas shopping, all kinds of issues which does not follow protocols and SOPs. Either they are late, they don't do according to what the bill of quantity said, or what the tender board has actually determined, etc., etc. So a lot of money gets slipped away like this. And in the public service, it's very hard to punish errant employees. They just get sent to some pool of people for a while, and then they get reassigned into other jabatans and departments. So it's a lot of job security there, because no one is really fully accountable. And that's why an independent ombudsman is really critical.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Cynthia. Let me just move forward to another next question. All right. Do you think Sabah and Sarawak will play a kingmaker in G15, or these 2 states just follow the peninsular political outcome? I think it might not be really. What do you? I think I'll move forward to the next question, because I was just thinking it, because it's not really related to us, as we are talking about anti-corruption as an election promise. Let me just move forward to the next one. Enforcing the election promises, more rhetoric or merely filling up the empty pages? It's just another, it's a comment, but can someone just add up on how this enforcing the election promises are more rhetoric or merely just filling up the empty pages? Maybe a comment from
I think, Aini, my view is that, you see, this is again how we look at things. Because election promises is usually not binding, and sometimes they do not take into account the doability of that election promise. It's very impractical, and suddenly they find themselves they cannot. So it is seen by political parties sometimes as rhetoric in order to entice or in order for them to get the necessary votes that they want. But I think it is, if we have, and this is important, if we have a public that is very engaging and conscious about discussing what the government or the political parties have promised, then we would have better accountability and answerability. There is a sense of responsibility. They just can't write beautiful words because they've got fantastic, I think, professional writers and people who specialize in writing in order to influence public attitudes or public voting. So I think it's about time that the Malaysian public should stop. The Malaysian electorate should stop, I think, just leaving matters of government to government. They must themselves ask the government or the executive to be accountable for what they have promised or for what they have written in the election manifesto. That is a very important issue. In other words, Malaysian public must be willing to question. There must be more questioning Malaysian public, more engaging Malaysian public, just not leave it to the government to do what they consider as right.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Tan Sri. I'll just move to the next one. How can we get the transparency on this, on anti-corruptions and promises of the, as an election promise? I think that's the question. How we can get the transparency on this? I think it's just the same as the previous one, but more on about anti-corruptions of the election, of the political parties on this.
Cynthia may have some, but I just my short view is that, we want, if they commit in their manifesto, all leaders of the political parties, as we discussed in our group, if all of them and members of parliament commit to make sure that everything that we have proposed or recommended that is practical and possible, when they get into power, they will actually, you are going to ask them to have a table of what these are the things that you promised, this you have performed, this you have not performed, then question them. Then I think they will be more weary of just simply making empty promises, that we will make sure that corruption is on the top of our agenda. I think we have enough promises, we have enough words. What we need are action. Let us make people who can government, who will be in power, that walk the talk, not simply think that, since the public now, it is a popular subject to talk with the corruption busters and also I think to talk about corruption. So we include in our agenda, but they must be questioned. Why is this not there yet? Why is this not there? Like whistleblower, the protection of whistleblower, I think the amendment to certain sections, and then the reporting to parliament or whatever, and that is independent of the executive. Totally independent, there is nowhere in the world it is totally independent. But there must be some form of independence that the public will keep on asking the question. I believe is public participation. You must have a participative democracy. You cannot have democracy without participation.
Sure. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Tan Sri. I just want to move to the next question. I'm moving quite fast now. How do we eradicate the self-centered interests of many politicians that winning an election pave ways for the means towards riches, fame, and fortune? Maybe an insight from Mr. Tama? Yeah.
I think very simply we just have to change the incentive structure of politics. And we have to regulate what it means to get money in politics, right? And I think the great thing is that there's so many models that we can learn from across the world. One of the big issues with Malaysia is that the first and foremost thing is that we don't really have a definition for political corruption, right? So what we think as an average person, and we can all agree, it's unethical. Like, for example, if let's say I give 10 million ringgit to someone in order to get a project or a contract, right? Or I give X amount of money in order to secure something, right? We can all agree that is from any moral term, that is unethical. But as we've seen in recent court cases, that is technically legal if we are giving a political donation, right? So now these terms have become vague, and these political donations, even as long as they are committing to give it out to some part of their party or some part of the machinery, some okay, right? So I think this is the issue that first and foremost, we must be able to regulate what it means to have money in politics. That's number one. Number two is that I do think that having asset declaration laws are so fundamentally important, right? In certain countries, especially the US, they even track, if let's say you're a member of Congress, you are someone who is in a high-ranking position, they even track your investments, right? Where are you putting your money into? Because you don't want insider trading to happen. Essentially, you invest in certain stocks and you help legislation to make those companies prosper, and then you immediately get huge amount of benefit because you invested in those companies before you allowed those stocks to pass parliament or pass their version of parliament, right? So there are many ways that needs to happen, but I think the core element is this. One is we need to regulate money in politics. Number two is that we need to regulate politicians to make sure that we understand where their sources of income coming from. Is it reported? Is it clear? And it must be a shift where being a politician and being a leader is a public service, right? When you have this sort of control mechanism, this sort of regulation, it then becomes the core, which is it is a public service instead of a means to become a career politician, to become a multi-millionaire or even a multi-billionaire, right? I think these are the clear elements. And of course, having anti-corruption reforms, right? Because when you are afraid of making, of being corrupt and benefiting yourself directly, you're afraid of doing so. Therefore, you automatically are moving or shifting away politics from being one that's centered around greed to being one that's centered around service, right? At the moment, politicians and leaders that are focused on service, focused on doing greater good in society, they can't survive, right? They don't last long in politics, unfortunately, right? Because they don't have the right funds, they don't have the right resources, and they don't have the right amount of help for them to prosper in the current system. But that means that a lot of our current crop of politicians are a lot of it centered on money, power, and riches, fame, and fortune, right? So I think, again, it's about shifting incentive structures towards creating that ideal politician who is about service more than self-interest.
Can I say something as a former politician? I think it is, maybe we should follow the law in Thailand. When you want to contest election, there is an asset declaration. When you want to contest election, there is asset declaration. Upon leaving it, then you have to do another asset declaration. So if there is an increase of your assets, of your wealth, so I think you need to explain. And you must have a good explanation. And I think this is good as a practical move, rather than us saying that, no, this is, we need to define. I'm not, I think defining and also a thing doesn't change the values. Our value system must be right. And in order to do that, I think I would like to add on to what Tama said. I think the most important thing is, as a member of parliament or state assemblyman, it is not the young berhormat that is important. The honorable thing that is important. It is not a profession. It is not a job. But it is actually giving service to the public, to your electorate. That is the most important element that needs to be pressed on and to be understood as a necessary moral and ethical values of all representatives of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. It's 9:30. I need to wrap up, but I will just run through the question and see the one that most relevant and to get all the panelists to answer. Yeah. This is one of the questions: how to effectively reduce corruption where it's pervasive and it has tentacles from the politician to civil service throughout government agency, the police, the military corporation sectors, what structures. In my opinion, I think we have covered this on the mechanism of corruption. So I will move forward to the next question: how to spread the right info and politicians to voters, especially those rural Malay, effectively. Can we maybe a little bit of this from the panelists?
Can I start this thing? Then I think the others can come in.
Yeah.
I think what I don't like about this question, it seems to suggest that rural voters are ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
They are less informed. They are not better. They don't understand the politics of things. I came from a rural constituency, and I think they have access to information but this is the most important thing: is your standard of judgment, and value system that you make. The problem with Malay voters especially is their faithfulness, their loyalty. These are values, when you talk about loyalties, they are faithful to, like now, you ask them, say people in certain rural areas, to vote against. At worst, if they do not, they will not go to vote, but they will not vote against the party that they have considered embedded as part of the bloodstream, and the politicians of all parties will take advantage of this. So you have got the ethnic issue, the religious issue. So I think it is important for us to say that anything you do, they will not be endangered. They don't have to be, they must follow to say that if you do something wrong, if they have done something wrong, you don't have to vote for them. You don't have to have blind loyalty. You have to get rid of this concept of blind